About Node. Does anybody have any idea what Node is? I know some of you have probably worked with it already.
Is it the V8 engine?
Okay. It's not the actual V8 engine, but it is an execution environment. Okay. So this allows us to actually work with JavaScript on a server. And probably most of you guys have only worked with JavaScript thus far in the browser, so this is going to be a little bit of a change. We're going to find that some things are still available in Node that we're used to from the browser, but other things might not be available. Okay? So let's just glance at Node on Wikipedia real quick and just see what that gives us. So Node, whoops. Node.js. You can see over here on the side, if we look it up on Wikipedia, open source cross-platform, executes JavaScript code outside of a browser. So prior to this, prior to the initial release, which was 2009, we could only execute JavaScript code inside the browser. So it's kind of a big change for us here. All right. And let's compare this to what we've been doing. So you guys have gone through Python, and you've also done some Java, right? We can run Python in a shell. And in a similar sense, we can also run Node in a shell. So if I want to open up a shell in my terminal here, I can just go Node, and this is after we've installed Node. So you guys probably haven't done this yet. But if I just go Node, I can actually set up a Node terminal, and I can do anything that I would do in regular JavaScript. Var this var equals some val. All right, undefined. What does that mean? Anybody know why we're getting undefined there? Say that again. Yeah, exactly, because that assignment that I just made did not return any kind of a value, right? Okay. All right, so let's keep going here, and if you want to actually get out of this, you should be able to do process.exit to get me out of my Node shell. All right. So what you guys want to do is you're going to want to download the most recent version of Node. And the place that you can do that is on the actual Node.js website, and that would be nodejs.org. And you can see these are the LTS version is the long-term support, and then the current version is 12.10.0. Go with the LTS version, just so that we're all kind of on the same page. The version 12 is going to have some bleeding edge features in it, but it may not be quite as stable as what we're using. All right. There's also something else I wanted to make mention of, which is called the Node Version Manager. And what this would allow you to do is to actually install different versions of Node on your system. So it makes upgrading and downgrading a super breeze. So if you look up NVM, you'll see there's this GitHub repo here, and it'll tell you basically how to install this. So what I can do is I can shoot you guys a link to this on Mattermost in case you want to actually do that. Like I said, it makes upgrading and downgrading a breeze, so I can just go like this, NVM ls remote, and then if I go -lts, it'll tell me what are all the versions that I have available to install. Okay? And then if I say nvm ls, it'll tell me which versions do I actually have installed. You can see I'm using, hopefully you can see that, you can see I'm using 10.16.3, right? Also known as Dubnium. Okay? So that's basically the installation portion. You're just going to follow the instructions at nodejs.org, or if you want to do nvm, then you can just say nvm and install some version. Like if I go nvm install 10.16.3, I already have it, so it may stop. I don't know. Already installed. Yeah, cool. All right. The other thing that we want to talk about briefly is package managers. And we'll actually come back to package managers. But if I want to see what node version I'm running, node-v. All right, 10.16.3, we're all good there. Now let's actually try to run a Node.js file. We were doing that yesterday, but let me create a new one. So if I go new, let's just set something. What variable do you guys want to set? A equals 1. Man, that's so exciting. All right. And then I love it. Let's just console log that guy, right? All right, so let's save this wherever we are. Actually, I think I'm in, yeah, so I'm in there. So we'll say example, oops, .js. Oops, I already had that. Cancel, node.js. And then in here, let me actually go to the location where this file is. So stacks, mean, lectures. Okay, and then we'll run it by just saying node and then the name of the file. Okay, so that's pretty exciting. We console logged 1, right? That's pretty much it though. As far as running a node file, you're either going to run it with node itself, or you guys will be running it with this thing called nodemon, which we'll cover in a little bit. And what nodemon does is it gives you hot reloading. So anytime you make a change in your server code, it's just going to refresh it right there. So it makes development quite smooth. All right. Let's talk about some of the differences between Java in the browser, or JavaScript in the browser versus JavaScript in Node. And in order to do that, what we're going to do is actually pull up the docs for Node.js, which is right here. So if we go to docs, and then we can select the version that we're using. So we're on 10.16.3. And this basically gives us all the different modules that are going to be available in Node for us. Okay? Now if we want to check to see what's available in the browser, we could go to the Mdm Docs. So this is Mozilla Developer Network. And then we should be able to see where the actual browser, build in the browser, 1 second, browser console. Okay, so these are the docs here. So this is the browser console, which we all know and love, right? We know how to do console.log and things like that, right? Okay, now let's talk about some things that are actually not going to be available inside Node. So do you guys know what alert does in the browser? What does it do?
Pop-up little thing.
So it's going to pop up an actual, yeah, I don't want to say a window, but actually it'll just give us a little pop-up with whatever we alerted, right? And let's test this in the browser real quick so we're all on the same page. So if I open up here and I just say alert, hello, okay, so that's what alert is going to look like. What do you think is going to happen if I try to run that inside Node? If I try to alert something?
Open up the browser.
Okay. Any other guesses?
Nothing happens.
Nothing. Yeah. Is alert defined in Node? No, it's not. Right. So let's actually log it out. And in my code here, I'm going to run this with nodemon, so we don't have to keep stopping it and then starting it again. So we'll say nodemon node.js, and then in here, let's just comment this out. Oops. And then we'll console.log alert. So note here, we actually get an error. Why is that? It's not defined, right? So it's not one of those situations where we said down below, like if we come down here and we say var alert, what's going to happen here? It's undefined, but it does get hoisted, right? So we won't actually get a reference error. It won't say, hey, this thing is, doesn't exist. We should get what kind of error? Any? No error, right? So in this case, it gets hoisted, the actual variable declaration, but since we never assigned it to any kind of a value, it's undefined, right? Did anyone see that that article about hoisting that I posted up for you guys? Nobody looked at it? Man, do you guys check Mattermost at all? Come on! Anyway, well, I found this article that had some other interesting hoisting situations for you that were a little bit more, they kind of push things a little bit further than the exercises that we did yesterday. So I just thought it would be kind of an interesting thing for you guys to look at. All right? No worries, though. What else is undefined in Node? Window, right? Has anyone ever messed with the window object in the browser? Nope.
Just once. Yeah.
Nobody? Once? Alright, let's console log it out. So in the browser, we have this window object that has a bunch of different properties on it. Okay? It's a dollar property, all kinds of stuff here. ATOB. So what do you think we're going to have when we console log window inside Node? Same thing, right? Let's do it. Let's get rid of this. Console.log window. Okay? Same exact thing because it's not defined anywhere. And then again, if we want to just show that we know how hoisting works, we can do the exact same thing. And now it's just going to be undefined, right? The actual variable declaration gets hoisted, but it still doesn't have a value to it. Another thing that we don't have in the in Node, or actually something that we do have in Node, but that we do not have in the browser, is require. Does anybody know what require is going to do for us in Node? If you had to take a guess. What do you think that's going to do when we use the require statement inside Node? It's for actually importing other modules, right? Let's see what happens when we try to log that in a browser. So in a browser context here, let me get to the bottom. Actually, let me just close this down. Okay, so if we say console.log require, what should we get here? Error, right? Yeah, because it simply doesn't even exist. There we go. Require is not defined. All right. So now we're kind of getting used to seeing these errors a little bit and what they mean, and that'll help as you, because you guys are going to come across a lot of errors. Obviously, I'm sure you've gotten used to that by now. So let's keep going. So there are basically these two different APIs. We have the web API, which just deals with everything that happens in the browser. And then we have a Node API. And as you guys have learned here, those two things are not necessarily the same. So if we want to find out about what can we do in Node, again, where do we need to go? Documentation, which is at what site? Node.js.org, correct. All right. And then the docs for the browser, again, should be here on the Mozilla Developer Network, so you guys can go to developer.mozilla.org. Okay? And if you ever have a question, is something available in this context, you're going to look it up. All right? Good deal. Any questions so far about Node versus the browser? JJ, you good? All right. Let's keep going. All right. What is an API? Does anybody know what that means? Yeah. So what does that mean? So basically, it's a way in which we can interact with something, and it doesn't even necessarily have to be like, let's think about CSS, for instance. CSS basically has its own API. It has its own way that we need to write it, right? So when we are inside of a CSS file, what's generally the first thing that you're going to see in there?
Selector.
Anyone remember CSS? Yes. All right, good. Okay, and then what are we going to see after that?
Attribute.
Okay, so we're gonna open up some curly braces and then actually have some rules inside there, right? What do we want to happen with that specific selector? So that's the API that CSS gives us, right? Node obviously has its own API, and the web also has its own API as well. So we're gonna get comfortable with those two things. API is also used in a different kind of context. Oftentimes when you hear like somebody's using Amazon's API or who else might have an API? Does Uber have an API? Does anyone know? Yes, they do. Say that again. Win32. What's that API?
Windows.
Mm-hmm. But specifically, like, what does that API allow us to do? I guess that's what I'm asking.
Interact with the operating system.
Okay. Okay, fair enough. All right. You can think of an API almost as anything that you can interact with, like, for instance, a plug in the wall, right? Do you guys have to worry about how that electricity is getting to the plug there? Do you have to think about how is the electricity getting from whatever power plant it's coming from all the way here to this building into that outlet? Do we have to give that any thought? No. What was that? No. Right. It's really nice, right? It's like we don't have to think about any of these things. We just simply plug something in and great, I'm getting power. You know, or another example might be if you're driving your car down the street, you may not know a thing about how cars actually work. Or you may know very little about it, but that doesn't really affect your ability to drive, right? If you know how to operate the steering wheel. So a car kind of gives us this API. We steer with the wheel, we speed up with the gas pedal, and then we brake with the brake pedal. So I mean, like all these basic things, they're all built into the way the car functions, and we don't have to think about the underlying complexity of it. So that's essentially what an API gives you. If we're talking about an API that allows us to communicate with other services across the internet, then generally we're going to be using something like JSON to actually do that. So we may make a call to some service, and then they're going to send us back some data, typically in JSON. All right? And we're going to be doing a lot of that in this stack too. Okay, so let's keep going. The other thing we want to talk about is the package manager when we're in Node. So you guys have dealt with some different package managers so far. What package manager did you use when we were working at Python? Pip, right? So we would say pip install and then some name of package. How about you guys coming from Java? What were you using there? Maven, right? Okay. So in Node, what we're going to be using is something called NPM. What that stands for is Node Package Manager. And you will get it by default. So once you actually install Node, you will have NPM automatically. So if I close out of this real quick, we could say npm-v, and it'll tell me that I have NPM version 6.9.0. If you actually want to look up packages, you can also go to npmjs.org. And as you can see here, like, what kinds of packages might you guys want to look up? We'll look up something real quick. NodeMon, okay, that's a good one. So if I search for that, it's the top result, an exact match. And basically it'll tell you some things about it. And it'll also give you some links too. So if I want to go to the GitHub for this specific package, I can just click this. It also tells me who the collaborators are on it, and also the number of weekly downloads. So you can see NodeMon is extremely popular, downloaded over 1.5 million times per week. All right. And that's about it. So if you're ever looking for a package to write some code, say you think, oh, maybe somebody else has already written the functionality for this, you can easily look it up on npmjs.org or .com, see if that package exists already, right? And if I wanted to see, hey, how stable might this package be, or is this something worth using, I might click on that GitHub link and take a quick look here and see how many issues there are. So me as a developer, I'm thinking, wow, this thing has 9 issues and it's downloaded over 1.5 million times per week. Does that seem pretty solid to you guys? Pretty solid, right? All right. So that's NPM. And we're just going to kind of demonstrate how to actually set up a new project, because you guys will be doing this a lot in the stack. What we're going to do is I'm going to just create a new folder here. So we'll say make dir node example, and then I'm going to cd into it node example. And then what I want to do is actually initialize a project with npm. And that's going to allow me to install some dependencies for that specific project. Okay? So let's go npm init. And then what it's going to do is it's going to ask you some different questions when you initialize a project. So it's going to ask you, what do you want to call this? And you can see in there it's giving me a default name of example. So if I just press enter, it will accept that. The version of the package that I'm creating, or the software I'm creating, 1.0. And a number of different things. So the entry point is basically like, where is the starting point for your application? Okay. Now if you just return through everything, it will accept all the defaults and it'll say, is this okay? Yes. Okay, now let's see what actually happened here. So if I open up code dot. So let's open up this folder here, and you'll see I've got this new file here, package.json. All right, and that's just going to have some basic information about my project. So it's got a name, it's got my version, my entry point here. So main was index.js, and then we can also optionally have some scripts. So some things that we want to run with it. You could put in an author, a license. Now another thing that we're going to do is we're going to end up installing some dependencies in our projects. Alright, so let me show you guys how that works. If I open up a terminal here, I got something about git lens here. Unable to find git. Okay, so installing packages, super easy. All I need to say is npm install, and I'm going to install Express. That's something that we're going to use later on. Actually, not too far down the road. Okay. So it's going to install it for me, and then let's see what happens to our package.json here. Hey, something changed here. So I've got this new dependencies object here that has some different keys and values. So it's just telling me this project depends on Express. Okay, so it needs Express. And the other thing that this is going to allow us to do is it's going to allow us to share our projects with other developers, but we don't actually have to keep all of the modules that the project depends on inside of our repository. Okay. And one way that we could actually do that, you guys, I know, all saw the Git lecture, is that we can set up this git ignore file. Oops. So if I set up a git ignore file and I decide to ignore the node modules, I don't have to worry about that node modules folder ever showing up inside my project's repository. Now, why would I want to ignore that?
It's really big.
It's going to be enormous. Yeah, it's going to be huge. You guys will see, because what happens when we install one dependency, what if that dependency has other sub-dependencies? So it goes in this recursive fashion. It actually has to resolve all of those subdependencies as well. So you'll typically end up with quite a large node modules folder. Okay. Let's go back here. So that's basically like how you guys are going to set up your projects when you're first starting something. And then the other thing that we want to talk about today is just a couple modules that are built into Node. So the FS module and the HTTP module. So for those, let's open up the docs and take a look at them. So I got the docs over here. And if I go FS, whoops, where is the FS? File system. Okay. So when we want to interact with the file system, like for instance, let's say we want to read a file, we would use the FS module. And as you can see, the FS module has all kinds of different functionality in it. So if I go fs.read file, you can see what arguments this would actually take, and then if you click on it, you'll see that this would take the path of the file that we're looking for, and then an options argument, and then a callback. So what do you think this callback is for?
What to do is
Well, yeah, it will be a function. That's correct. Yeah. Go ahead, Alan.
what to do is to file.
Yeah, exactly. So what do we want to have happen once we've successfully read that file? Now there's another version of read file. It's called read file sync. And the difference with read file sync, so JavaScript is typically asynchronous. What does that mean?
The interpreter interprets only one line at a time.
Say that one more time.
The interpreter only operates or works on a single line at a time.
Okay, but that would be single-threaded, right?
Yeah, kind of.
Okay. Yes? One thing at a time, right? Single-threaded. Okay, so what does it mean if we're running some asynchronous code? Like, let's say we're inside a browser context and we're doing some jQuery, something like that, right?
One function at a time.
So yeah, it's still going to only execute one thing at a time, but what does that mean if we're doing something asynchronously? So if I click on a button in that document, and then I want to do something to respond to that click, what does that mean that we're doing it asynchronously?
It's gonna wait for the response.
You fire and forget. You fire the request and you don't wait for it to return. It'll come back with a response.
And then it goes back to the same one for the
Right, so basically JavaScript needs to get through all of its original parsing. So if we load up a page, it's going to need to get through all the code that's on that page, right? And then later on, so asynchronously, we may want to listen to different events on that page. So we might want to listen for a button click, or we might want to listen for a scroll event or something like that, right? And what this is going to allow us to do is it's going to allow us to do some processing that won't actually interfere with other activities that are happening on the page. Okay? So if our interpreter is still parsing through the code and somebody clicks on a button, is that even going to register at that point? Are we going to respond to that click right away if we're still parsing through our code? No. Not right away, right? However, getting back to this, if we want to actually read a file synchronously, we don't actually need to pass it a callback function. We could actually just get the value of the file. So let's see what the signature of this particular function looks like. Oops. So here, file URL equals some URL, and then we're saying fs.readFileSync. So that's giving us, should be giving us the actual file itself. Okay, so we don't actually have to run a callback once we've retrieved the file. We can just set that equal to a variable. All right, you see the difference there? Okay. So that's the FS module. The other one that we're going to be using a little bit is the HTTP module. So let's go over here onto the side here and just open that up real quick. So what do you guys think the HTTP module might do, if you had to guess? Respond to request. Yeah, good. Okay, so what can we create with the HTTP module?
Server.
Boom, a server, right? So we even have, there's a method called that here. So if we say http.createServer, we can open that up here. And these are basically going to be the different options here. So we've got, create server, and it's going to take an objects, or an options object, and then it's also going to take a request listener. Right? And what we're going to do is just toy around with this real quick. We're just going to grab the code from the platform to create a server using the HTTP module, and then we'll test it out. All right. So let's get inside. Sorry, I'm inside Python here. Okay, you guys are in Node. So the HTTP module, here's some boilerplate code that we can actually use to create the server. We do not need to install these two packages. They're available to us by default. We don't need to install HTTP or FS. Let's grab this code here. Sorry guys, I know this is like extremely exciting, but it's fundamental. However, all right. So let's. We don't yet have a file here. Let's create an index, or we'll just call this server.js. Drop that in there, and let's read through this code a little bit. So what's happening? Okay, so we're creating a server using the http.createServer method here. And then that is taking in some kind of a callback. Okay? What does our callback function have? What arguments will that have? Request and response. Okay? And then what we're going to do is if the request.url equals a /, so if that's the index route, what are we going to do? We're going to read a file called index.html, and then notice how that has its own callback. You see how we're starting to move towards the right here? Whoa. Okay. And then inside that callback, so again, we talked about read file. When we don't use the read file sync method, we actually have to pass in a callback that knows how to handle what do we do once we have a hold of this file that we just grabbed. Right? Then all we're going to do is we're going to write the head. So this is our response code that we're sending back. And then we're telling it the content type of this is going to be text or text/HTML. We're writing the actual contents of the response. And then the response.end is important because that's telling it that our response is finished. Okay? So if I fire this up in the in Node right now, is this going to work as it's written?
Should be.
Yeah, do I have this file though? No. No, not yet, right? Okay, so let's create that file and then let's just finish talking about this. So else, we're going to write a head response of 404. So what does 404 mean again? Page not found. And then we would end the request with file not found. Then down here, server.listen, what do you think that is? 6784. Port number. Yes, exactly. So the console log, we're just saying we're listening in localhost. All right, so let's create a new file here. Oops, let me do it actually inside. So index.html, and then I'm just going to throw in some boilerplate. We'll say hello from Node. Okay, so we got that. Let's try to run this guy. So clear that out, and then we'll just say node mon, and then I'm going to run my server.js. Okay, so we're running on localhost 6789. What's going to happen here if I go to localhost 6789, hello from Node? Pretty cool, right? So we just sent back an actual HTML file. Obviously, there's nothing dynamic in that HTML file. It's just all something static that we created. The other thing that we can do is we can get some information about the request method as well. So let me just, inside here, let's console log. So we've got client request URL, and let's console log the request method. All right, what do you think the request method is going to be? A GET request, right? Good. So let's refresh the page. Here we go. So I've got my my request method. Note the casing that it gave it to me in, right? All caps. So when you guys are doing your Node stuff and we're using the FS create server, you're going to need to use all caps if you're checking to see what the actual request method was. All right. I think that's pretty much all we had to cover. Let me double check and make sure. Package.json, right? Oh, the other thing that we can log to is just the actual request itself. So let's look at that real quick. So if I were to actually console log the request, and I'll comment that guy out there. Let's just take a quick look at it. Refresh my page. Whew. A monster object. So this thing is quite large. Incoming message. Okay, so that's the entire request that is coming into your application. There's a lot of information there. We won't generally be using a lot of these things in the object. I just wanted to show it to you guys. But generally for these assignments where we're just doing things with Node and the FS module, you're going to be using the request.url, and you'll probably be using the request.method.
In practice, how would you do logging? Would you write it to another file? You turn on logging on the server?
Yeah, you definitely want to have that in a different file. However, we're not going to end up writing our projects using just the FS module. We're going to be doing it inside Express. So, yeah, and there are a lot of different logging. Like, for instance, if we go back to npm.js, you can see that there are a lot of different available libraries that you can use for logging. Winston, I know, is a pretty popular one as well. Wow. Over 3 million downloads a week on that guy. So that's one available solution. All right. Any questions?
What if we have a package that's not built in Node and is also like installed globally, so it's not locally?
Okay.
I'm assuming that's not going to show up in the dependency in the package.json.
Correct. Yeah. So for you guys, when you go to install NodeMon, which you will definitely do. Oh, There's an update available for NodeMon. Okay, so this is great. So this will just show you how to install something globally. You'll say npm install, or I for short, and then you could say -g, which tells it I want to install this thing globally, not in the local packages as Alan mentioned there. So we'll go -g NodeMon.
But when we have something like this, how do we let, like, say, other developers know that we are using this for our project?
You can put it inside the dev dependencies if you want. So like I could say npm I think it's -D if I remember correctly. NodeMon. Let's see if it puts it in the dev dependencies here. Yeah, so it'll create a separate dev dependencies object for you. All right. Does that answer your question?
Yep.
Good? Okay, cool. Any other questions? No? All right, cool. So we'll plan to meet up in the afternoon and do that Ajax demo. All right?
Very nice. A lot of info.
Yeah, a lot of info.